I never thought a Tuesday afternoon in the bookstore could feel like the edge of something dangerous. The bell over the door jingled as I stepped inside, shaking the chill off my jacket. Rows of old, half-forgotten paperbacks smelled like dust and rain, a quiet refuge from the hum of the city outside. And there she was. Her hands were stacked with novels behind the counter, neatly arranged as if she'd been waiting for me to notice every crease and dog-ear. Mid-40s, sharp cheekbones, eyes that didn't just look at you, but seemed to weigh your very intentions. I'd seen women like her in movies, confident, commanding, untouchable, but she wasn't acting. She was. And somehow, she saw me, right past the nervous slump in my shoulders, past the loose hair falling into my eyes. "You'll leave too," she said, almost conversationally, glancing at the stack of books I had in my arms. Her voice had this low, even cadence, like someone used to being heard without asking for it. I froze mid-step. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, but something in her gaze made me catch my breath anyway. I replied before thinking, the words slipping out like they'd been waiting in my chest. "Only if my heart stops beating." She blinked, just once, then let a small smile twitch at the corner of her lips. Not mocking, not inviting, just acknowledging. Like I'd given her a puzzle she hadn't expected, but now couldn't ignore. I moved toward the fiction aisle, pretending to read the back cover of a tattered paperback, but I could feel her watching. There's a strange electricity in being seen like that, like someone has reached under your skin without touching it. I wanted to look away, wanted to act normal, but my fingers kept brushing the edges of the books, waiting for her to say something else. She walked past me then, barefoot in her sneakers, and it felt like the air in the room shifted. A stack of books teetered near the register, and I almost reached for it, but she steadied it first, her fingers brushing the corners. The contact was accidental, quick, but it left this small pulse in my chest. She didn't comment. She didn't have to. "Are you finding what you're looking for?" she asked after a pause. Her voice wasn't rushed. It never was. She spoke with this calm confidence, like time didn't dare interrupt her. I nodded, words failing me, and she leaned against the counter just slightly, letting her weight shift, a subtle gesture, but enough to make the space between us electric and awkward all at once. I wanted to tell her everything. How the sound of her laugh, clipped and soft, lingered in my head. How the curve of her smile had unsettled me since the moment I saw her. But I couldn't. Instead, I watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear and felt this odd mixture of admiration, fear, and longing coil tight in my chest. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I'd probably never come back tomorrow, that she was someone else's world entirely. But as I turned to leave, her eyes caught mine again over the top of the counter. Just for a second. Enough to burn the image into my memory. Sharp, patient, teasing, untouchable. And I knew, in that moment, I'd be thinking about her long after the door had closed, the bell's jingle fading behind me. It was late afternoon when I returned to the bookstore, the sky outside bruised with the first hints of evening. She was there, crouched on the floor behind the counter, untangling a mess of cables from the old cash register. "Thought you'd moved on," she said without looking up, her tone dry but not unkind. I set my bag down, keeping my voice even. "Just curious." Her fingers worked quickly, brushing against each other as she tried to unknot the wires. I noticed the subtle tremor, like she was holding back more than just frustration. I knelt beside her, pretending to examine a frayed cable, but my eyes kept catching the small details, the pale streaks in her hair, the way her shoulders tensed, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes that deepened when she frowned. "Careful," she murmured, not looking at me. "This thing's older than both of us combined." I offered a tentative smile. Maybe it just needs someone patient. She finally glanced up, and there was a flicker in her expression, something almost shy, quickly replaced by that guarded calm she wore like armor. For a moment, she let her eyes linger on mine, unblinking, and then she shook her head, as if to dismiss the vulnerability that had dared to surface. "Don't get used to it," she said softly, almost a whisper, before bending over the wires again. I watched her hands, strong but delicate, moving with careful precision. There was a quiet grace in the way she worked, even as fatigue hovered in the slight slump of her shoulders. I wanted to ask if she'd eaten, if she was tired, but I didn't. I could feel the line between help and intrusion, and I respected it, silently hoping she'd let me cross it someday. A small laugh escaped her lips as one particularly stubborn wire finally gave way. It was fleeting, barely there, but it made the air between us shimmer, a sound I wanted to memorize. "You're quiet," she said after a moment, straightening up. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just observant, like she was trying to read something in me she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "I'm listening," I replied, shrugging, trying to keep my own pulse from betraying me. There was a pause then, filled only by the faint hum of the bookstore's old heater. She leaned back against the counter, brushing a hand across her face as if to hide a weariness I hadn't expected. And for a second, just a second, she looked fragile, real, and the air between us tightened, charged, impossible to ignore. I wanted to reach out, to brush that hair away, to offer some word that might ease her tension, but I didn't. I just stayed, watching her, feeling the pull of something unspoken, dangerous, and compelling. She finally glanced at me again, letting her gaze rest on me just a beat too long, and I felt it. The gentle gravity of a connection neither of us dared name, yet already impossible to forget. And when she turned her attention back to the tangled wires, I couldn't stop thinking about the curve of her shoulders, the soft tremor of her hands, the way her laugh had brushed past me like a warning and a promise. The rain started softly at first, tapping against the bookstore's tall windows like a timid question. By the time I was shelving the last row of paperbacks, it had grown into a steady drum. She was sitting on the counter, knees pulled up, arms resting on them, staring out at the gray blur of the street. The room smelled faintly of wet coats and old books, comforting, grounding, but somehow charged when she was near. "I didn't think anyone came back today," she said, not turning toward me. "Couldn't stay away," I murmured, and she let out a quiet hum that was almost a laugh, almost a sigh. The storm made the space feel smaller, closer, like the world outside had shrunk to just us. I found myself lingering near her, pretending to organize books while my ears caught every subtle sound. The shift of her weight, the soft brush of her hair as she tucked a strand behind her ear, the shallow exhale that seemed too deliberate. "You hear that?" she asked suddenly, voice low. "It's like the storm is yelling at me. Or maybe it's just me yelling at myself." I didn't answer right away, just watched her. Her hands were resting on her knees, fingers twitching slightly, and I wanted to reach out, to steady them, to offer some word that might cut through whatever she was wrestling with. But I didn't. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text. I glanced down, and she stiffened beside me, glancing at the screen in a way that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't mine. Not yet, anyway. A flicker of something passed over her face. Hesitation, guilt, maybe fear, and she looked away. "You okay?" I asked softly, careful not to push. She nodded, lips pressed thin. "Yeah, just someone checking in. Nothing important." We were quiet for a few beats. The kind of silence that carries more weight than words. I could feel the electricity in the space between us, subtle but undeniable. I wanted to lean closer, to let my shoulder brush hers, to test whether the line between us would shatter or hold. But before I could, her phone rang, loud, jarring, and she jumped slightly, fumbling to answer. The moment shattered. My hand hovered near hers, wanting, aching, but instead I stayed still, watching her animated expression through the phone, the tension in her shoulders softening slightly as she spoke. When she finally hung up, she looked at me with a faint, apologetic smile. "Sorry. I guess storms bring more than rain." I nodded, swallowing the ache in my chest. I wanted to say something foolish and brave, something that might have changed everything, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I stayed, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, too aware of how small the space between us was. Our knees nearly touched, our fingers almost brushed as we reached for the same stack of books. I pulled back slightly, heart racing, telling myself it was for the best. But even as I straightened, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we had been, how almost everything had almost happened, and how the storm outside had mirrored the storm inside me. And in that pause, just a heartbeat before the physical world intervened, I felt it. The pull, undeniable, urgent, and utterly forbidden. The bookstore was almost empty that evening, just the two of us and the faint hum of the heater. She was perched on a stool behind the counter, tracing the edge of a book with her fingertip, eyes distant. I leaned against the opposite shelf, pretending to read a cover, but my gaze kept finding her, catching her in that delicate pause between thought and action. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, not uncomfortable, but charged, like holding a live wire in your hands and daring it not to shock you. Finally, she spoke, quiet, hesitant. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" I froze mid-breath. The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. I wanted to laugh, to brush it off, but her eyes were steady on mine, unflinching, searching. Something raw and human shimmered in her gaze, a fracture in the confident armor I'd glimpsed before. I think about it," I said, carefully measured. "More than I probably should." She let out a short, humorless laugh and shook her head. "See, that's what scares me. People always think I know what I want. But I don't. Not really. Not like this." I wanted to reach across the counter, to close the gap between us, but I stayed still. Words felt like too much and not enough at the same time. Instead, I just watched, the way her hands rested on the book, the slight tremor in her fingers, the way her jaw tightened, as if holding herself together. I'm not sure what this is," she said, voice dropping almost to a whisper. "And maybe that's okay. Maybe it isn't. But I can't." She paused, swallowing hard. "I can't pretend it's normal anymore." Her eyes found mine, and suddenly, every bit of distance I'd maintained felt like a lie. I could see the weight of her history there, the years of self-reliance, of carefully measured boundaries, of silent battles no one else would ever see. And somehow, she was letting me in, if only just a crack. I wanted to tell her that I understood, that I'd been carrying the same confusion, the same impossible longing. But instead, I nodded slowly, letting my silence speak in a language that matched hers. I felt my pulse thrum in my ears, awareness of every inch between us, the room suddenly too small, too intimate, too real. "Maybe," she said after a long pause, "maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I shouldn't feel." Her voice broke on the last word, as if admitting it aloud made it dangerous, made it alive. I swallowed hard, not knowing whether to move closer or retreat. My chest ached with all the things I couldn't say, the confessions, the warnings, the forbidden pull that drew me toward her anyway. She looked down at the book again, and for a fleeting second, the facade cracked completely. A single, devastating line escaped her lips, soft but jagged. "I'm scared of what I want, and I don't even know if I deserve it." And just like that, the quiet between us carried more weight than any touch ever could. I stayed frozen, heart hammering, unable to answer, unable to do anything but feel the gravity of her fear pressing against my own. It was quieter than usual when I arrived that afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and glistening in the pale sunlight. She was sitting behind the counter, her posture unusually still, staring at a small stack of envelopes. One of them had a corner torn, ink smudged, and something about it made my chest tighten. "You ever lose someone you shouldn't have?" she asked suddenly, voice low, as if testing the words on herself before releasing them. I froze, unsure if she was talking about the past or the present. She didn't meet my eyes, just traced a pattern on the envelope with her finger. Someone who mattered, and then they're just gone. And you're left wondering what you could have done differently. Her words landed heavier than any storm. I wanted to offer comfort, but the truth was, I didn't know how. Instead, I walked over, careful not to crowd her, and crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "Maybe they were never supposed to stay," I said softly. "Maybe it's not about what you could have done, but what you remember about them." She looked up then, eyes glistening, and for the first time I saw cracks in her confidence, the fragility she'd always masked behind poise. She swallowed, letting a shudder pass through her shoulders. I kept the letter once. Never sent it. just held on to it for years. My pulse quickened, and without thinking, I asked, "Can I see it?" She hesitated, then slid the envelope toward me. The paper was thin, almost translucent, with words written in a careful hand. I recognized the hesitance behind each line, the unsaid apologies, the regrets, the longing that refused to fade. It wasn't a letter to me. It wasn't about me. And yet, holding it, reading it, I felt her history settle between us like dust and sunlight. "I thought I could forget," she whispered, more to herself than me. "But some things, some people, they stay with you, whether you want them to or not." I reached out, just slightly, and let my hand hover near hers. Not touching, just close enough to let her know she wasn't alone. "You're not alone," I said quietly. "Not now." Her eyes flicked to mine, and in that glance, I saw recognition. Not romance, not desire, not yet, but understanding. Shared grief. A quiet acknowledgement that life had carved her in ways I could never fully comprehend, but that somehow I still mattered. She exhaled slowly, almost trembling, and tucked the letter back into its envelope. Like tucking away a piece of her soul she wasn't ready to surrender. Then she looked up at me, faintly smiling, but with a tremor in her voice. "Funny, isn't it? How holding on can feel like both comfort and punishment." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink deep into my chest. I wanted to say something brilliant, something that could erase the pain she'd carried all these years, but nothing fit. So I just stayed there, letting the quiet swell between us, letting the gravity of her past settle beside my own heart. And for a moment, that silent presence felt seismic, like the world had shifted just slightly, irreversibly, around us. It was late, and the bookstore had emptied, the shelves casting long shadows under the warm lamplight. She was perched on the counter again, knees drawn up, a mug of coffee warming her hands. I leaned against the opposite shelf, pretending to organize books, but my eyes kept finding her, tracing the lines of her face in the soft glow. For a long while, we said nothing, just the small sounds of the heater humming, the occasional scrape of a page, the quiet rhythm of our breathing. It was a silence that didn't press or suffocate. It held us, allowed us to exist without pretense, without the weight of unspoken anxieties. Finally, she spoke, voice soft, careful. "I don't think we can pretend anymore." I nodded slowly, not because I had an answer, but because I felt the truth of it. The tension, the shared glances, the pull between us, it had become undeniable. We hadn't needed words to know it. She set the mug down and shifted closer to the counter edge. Our knees brushed lightly, accidental, and I didn't move away. The small contact was enough to send a quiet current through me, one I didn't want to break. She noticed, of course. Her eyes flicked to the spot where we'd touched, and she let herself linger there, as if testing it, naming it without speaking. I like that you see me," she murmured, almost to herself. "Even the parts one try to hide." I swallowed, the ache in my chest settling into something warmer, something that made the decision between us feel inevitable. "I've always noticed," I said quietly, "even when you didn't want to be noticed." She smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just that small, layered smile that carried decades of experience, laughter, sorrow, and resilience. She reached out, fingers brushing mine for just a heartbeat, a touch soft and deliberate. My hand didn't pull away. Neither did hers. It was simple, minimal, but it sealed everything we'd been circling for months. Acknowledgement, consent, and a fragile, human kind of closeness. We didn't speak after that. Words felt heavy, unnecessary. Instead, we sat on the floor near the counter, backs against the bookshelves, knees nearly touching, hands occasionally brushing together. The world outside didn't matter. The storm from days before had passed, leaving only the quiet hum of life continuing. And in that shared space, no promises, no declarations, no grand gestures. There was understanding. There was a truth we couldn't deny. Proximity had shifted into inevitability, and neither of us could go back. I watched her take a slow sip from her mug, the steam curling around her face, the lines of her expression softening in the warm lamplight. I let my fingers rest near hers again, close enough that our hands almost touched. Almost, but not fully. And yet it was enough. Finally, she leaned back against the shelf, eyes closing briefly, and I felt it, the quiet collapse of all the walls we'd built. Not into fantasy, not into certainty, just into each other's presence, steady, real, and human. And as I watched her, as I let the silence stretch between us, I realized I didn't need to say anything. The moment itself was enough. Complete in its simplicity. The bookstore, the rain-soaked streets, the tangled histories, it all faded into the quiet understanding of us. And for the first time in months, everything felt like it could just be. It's been months since that evening in the bookstore when everything shifted, though I can still feel it as if it happened yesterday. I'm leaning back in a chair by the window now, coffee cooling in my mug, and thinking about her. The way she moves through a room, the quiet certainty that comes from having survived storms I can't even imagine. I've changed too, in ways I barely recognize. The restless edge that used to define me has softened, replaced by a patience I didn't think I was capable of. I notice small things now, the way someone smiles before they think about it, the subtle shift in posture when someone lets themselves be vulnerable. And I know it's because of her. Because of the way she taught me, without ever saying a word, that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. We still sit in that same quiet rhythm sometimes, our fingers brushing across books or coffee mugs, silent acknowledgments of a bond that doesn't need a name. She's no longer untouchable, though she still carries that quiet strength that made me pause the first time I saw her. And I've learned to respect it, even as I lean closer than I ever thought I could. It wasn't easy, of course. We've stumbled, misread each other, let old fears creep in. But each misstep taught us more about who we are and how far we'd go to protect what had become ours. Not in a flashy, romantic way, but in the stubborn, human way of being present for someone when the world says you shouldn't. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at a memory, a shared glance, a stormy afternoon, a hand brushing across mine. And I realize that all of it has added up to something larger than either of us. Not perfection, not a fairy tale, just the quiet aftermath of two people who dared to notice each other and to stay. And that, I think, is what matters most. Presence. The unspoken acknowledgement that we exist in each other's worlds now, without needing to shout it, without needing to fix anything. The recognition that what we built, slow, fragile, imperfect, is stronger for every pause, every hesitation, every almost moment we survive together. I watch her now, moving between the shelves, humming softly as she places books in neat rows. My heart tightens, warm and steady, a reminder that some connections don't fade, they transform. That love isn't always about declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes it's just the quiet certainty of knowing someone sees you and chooses to stay. And as I sip the cooling coffee, fingers brushing hers across the table in a familiar, gentle rhythm, I realize the story isn't about beginnings or endings. It's about learning to exist fully, to feel deeply, and to let someone in without losing yourself. So, if you've ever found yourself standing at the edge of something you can't name, maybe take a breath. Notice it. Let it grow, slowly, quietly, until it becomes undeniable. And if you've been following our story, tell me, what moment made you hold your breath the most?